This is a very bad book, and I absolutely loved it for all of the catastrophic reasons we are going to get into in the next however many minutes. I'm going to assume like 30. First, though, I want to get into something that's a bit more outside the narrative and just energy I respect. Stephenie Meyer has been dogged on by the internet for the better part of 2 decades for her Twilight series. And releasing New Moon was an opportunity to revamp, reattempt the story in a new POV that could address a lot of the criticisms or complaints people had about her original series and the characterization of Edward. But there is a clear, deliberate energy here to just raise a middle finger to all of that and very faithfully retell this story unafraid of whatever criticisms had been laid. And that energy, I respect it so goddamn much.
Badass.
It is badass.
Stephenie Meyer, I don't know too much about you as an individual, but at least in terms of just being irrefutably yourself as a creative, well done. I have respect for that mentality. Now, let's get into what can only be described as a stunning dumpster fire. For this review, I'm excited to say we are going to go through the story a bit more in depth than we normally do. Though this is not a rant review. I don't have anger or hostility with my criticisms here, and instead, it's kind of like a glowing review covered in a rant review's icing. And happily, I don't have to worry about spoilers, not only because the story of Midnight Sun is just a retelling of a story from a new POV, which is creatively nothing I have a problem with, but also because Twilight is so successful, the general story here, because Midnight Sun is faithful to it, is kind of just permeated the zeitgeist. We all know about the sunshine moment, James, and the Edward-Jacob conflict, which, to my surprise, is pretty much not in this book at all. So come with me, fellow midlife crisis approaching millennials. Jump aboard, Gen Zers who may not be as familiar with this story, and Gen Alphas. There's so much in the future that's going to be so bad that you have to deal with, and I'm really sorry about that. As we go ahead and dabble our toes once again into a love story for the ages of Bella Swan and Edward, I'm well over 90 years old, Cullen. I'm not going to spend too much time on the setup here because we know the setup. The Cullen family is a pack of vampires, a coven if you will, who are existing in America's Northwest. Bella Swan, a child of divorce, is moving in with her father in a small town that is perpetually covered in clouds and rain, providing a perfect hiding place for vampires who sparkle in the sunlight. And there's a couple talking points here that have been done to death that I don't want to spend too much time getting into for my Midnight Sun deep dive, because I don't think I have too much new to add to the conversation. But I must say, just this once here at the beginning, I promise not again.
That was a lie.
Edward's age is not made better by this retelling of the story. I went into this book kind of thinking that Stephenie Meyer would deliberately make Edward seem like a 17-year-old to his core. That way, yeah, he's been around for a long time, but you could say like developmentally, he's still a 17-year-old. Except this book explicitly goes in the other direction while trying to have it both ways sometimes. It is immensely creepy, and in the very first scene, we get Edward thinking about high school girls as little girls.
I get older, they stay the same age.
And in fact, it becomes a core defining trait for Edward for pretty much throughout this entire book that he goes to high school, yes, but it seems mostly just to judge teenagers, like severely judge teenagers. He remarks that he's essentially memorized every single textbook he needs for all of his classes. He's not here to actually learn, and he spends most of his time in high school just violating the minds of young children around him at his will so that he can stalk Bella. That is this guy's 9 to 5. It's so bizarre to think about. This man has been on Earth for so long, just existing in high schools, essentially avoiding getting a job, which as a YouTuber, respect. And there's this consistent devotion throughout this story to have women thirst over Edward of all ages, young to old. If Edward walks in a room, it just becomes full on. After they think that, though, Edward will just think down to them. He's just like, these f***ers. He doesn't actually say that at any point, but the mentality's there. Every girl wants him. Every guy wants to be him and is jealous of him. There is like a weird power trip fantasy that if this was written by a male author, it would totally come across like a Red Letter Media black tank top movie. But instead, it's written by a woman, so it kind of comes down like this is just what she thinks the ideal man for her target demographic 17-year-olds are. But we can get into the problematic tendencies of the Bella-Edward relationship. We'll do that throughout the actual story, though, so let's get into the narrative. So Bella arrives at the high school the Cullen family has been attending for some reason to keep up their disguise, even though each of them could absolutely pass for graduated adults, at least you'd hope, because a bunch of adults constantly thirst over these kids. And she catches the eye of basically the entire town. Through Edward's POV, we see each man thirst over Bella so hard, which is kind of believable. New girl in a small town. The boys are gonna notice in the high school. For sure. The problem is, the reason she catches Edward's eye, can't read her mind. Not there. Not able to access and continue violating the most intimate privacy of everyone around him possible. Except he even remarks at one point that her thoughts probably wouldn't even be that interesting to begin with. Dude, you're so mean. It was at this point when the characterization of Edward is just off the cuff, insufferable to the extreme, that I made a commitment to myself that I would not refer to him as Edward. He does not deserve that name. And instead, he's Ed or Eddie. He does not deserve the panache of Edward. He gets Ed. This is where I began to have some actual desire to see Edward's character grow in this story. He's so unlikable from go that I began to realize, oh, the character trajectory for Edward is going to have him become more likable, his cold heart melt as he falls in love with Bella. I was a bit too bold there. That's not the trajectory of the characters, but I will at least say there is strong characterization for Edward. He is, to the maximum degree, a gigantic douchebag, driving around way too quickly in sports cars, talking down to nearly everyone around him, and oddly flashing cash a lot, all while creeping and stalking a girl through violating minors' minds incessantly. And from there, it gets worse. From a perspective point, though, this kind of became enticing and continually drew me through the narrative. As negative as I'm going to sound, I didn't struggle reading Midnight Sun. I had a good time. That's important to remember. There is so little conflict and such a devotion to repetition within Midnight Sun. This book began to feel kind of experimental to me. Most authors are like, how can I develop this conflict, these relationships, develop the story to keep the audience enticed? Stephenie Meyer is going, I know how horny you are for vampires. You'll stick around for just that. It is kind of interesting to see Bella's character presented to the reader as so clearly a not like the others girl, but not from her perspective. Usually that's the POV character for stories like these, but instead we're watching this not like the other girl from Ed. And with him kind of grabbing the reader by the scruff of the neck and forcing them to see Bella as he does, you can kind of understand why this psychopath begins stalking this child. Not for any good logical reason, just because you explicitly are told why this potential serial killer is really into this 17-year-old girl. I promise I'll let it go. I'll let it go. I'm letting it go. It's gone. It's fine. It's not fine. This inability to hear her thoughts, though, is elevated when Edward finds out that he has biology class with Bella, and she smells so amazingly good. Like, Bella is a barbecue on the side of the highway that has been roasting a pig for 12 hours level of salivating inducing goodness. And thus begins the biggest conflict of Midnight Sun. Edward's internal turmoil of really wanting to kill Bella Swan, just wanting to murder the absolute shit out of her. It's funny that the love does not come in first, and instead, Edward's first real interaction with Bella is her walking into a classroom and Ed thoroughly planning out a classroom-wide massacre so that he can drink her blood uninterrupted. It gets more disturbing from there. He details how he would just break everyone's neck and it would only take him a few seconds. Dude. This is how their first meeting in that biology class essentially comes across. I'm gonna kill all of these kids and then kill you. This is the most goodest smelling woman. Fortunately, a breeze wafts in another direction, giving him a brief reprieve from her scent, and the next iconic scene in the story happens. It's weird to say these are iconic scenes, but they've absolutely like bled into fantasy knowledge. So yes, the car crash that Edward saves Bella from, where Bella begins to have her suspicions confirmed that Edward may not exactly just be your average sulky uber-rich douchebag boy. And their first greater social interaction through this car crash is, yes, directly Edward trying to gaslight Bella into not realizing he speed ran across the parking lot to stop her from getting hit by a car. She doesn't fall for it though, and I kind of like that characterization for Bella. She's not someone you can easily lie to. She apparently can absolutely trip over nothing repeatedly. In fact, the most unbelievable part of the physics within the fantasy space for Twilight isn't that vampires exist, and instead, it's the level of clumsiness Bella Swan demonstrates. There's actually a scene where she trips twice walking across a flat cafeteria floor. Bella ends up getting taken to the hospital due to this savior incident because she bonks her little head, and Edward goes with her, and this causes them to actually interact and talk a bit more outside of just the sniffing that's occurred in classrooms. And this is where the romance really begins, and Edward actually kind of gives into this urge to be more around Bella as he begins to get his allegorical dick under control, and by that I mean being able to smell her without losing control of himself. And the chemistry between the two of them is unbelievably obnoxious and shallow, but my brain began to seek desperately little nuggets of actual development and growth, and there is some of that here. You can look into the pond and see chemistry happening. Bella is an immensely empathetic, kind person. And Ed, someone who insists on placing himself around the unfiltered thoughts of teenagers while being a mind reader, is getting a bit of a reprieve from the situation he voluntarily puts himself in. He cannot read her mind. She is a literal mystery to him, and that's infatuating for him. This is undercut by Ed beginning to talk down to every boy who shows any interest in Bella, in fact calling one of them generic.
Here we go again.
Okay, this is the last time I'm gonna bring it up, I swear to God, but Ed, you lived through the JFK assassination, World War II, Vietnam, the Civil Rights Movement, 9/11, and yet you have the personality to look at a still developing young boy who has a very much more understandable crush on an attractive female than yourself and go, generic.
He's just a boy.
You experienced Watergate. And at this point, Edward just actually spends the entire school day, if he is not directly with Bella, watching each and every single one of her movements through her classmates, not with her consent or theirs. Outside of the category of consent that's most important, Edward still struggles with that concept a lot. I would actually kind of appreciate characterization from Ed, where maybe he actually has become an immensely understanding person, because with constantly seeing the unfiltered thoughts of others around him, he has learned the difference between what exists in here and people's actions. Because as we all know and understand, actions matter more than words, and certainly more than thoughts. But no, in fact, he makes it a consistent behavior to not judge someone's character based off of their actions, and instead do it based off their most intimate, private thoughts. Okay, this continues into definitely the creepiest moments for Ed in the entire book, where he goes to watch Bella non-consensually in her sleep and listens to her heartbeat while also kind of violating her privacy physically and going into her room. And it was at this point that I started imagining Ed with the facial expression in a tree of like Jack Torrance looking into Bella's room, just sitting there like, "She said my name in her sleep." And if I was going to make a change to Midnight Sun, it would be, obviously, age up Bella a bit, make her a freshman at a community college by her dad. I think you would still hit the exact demographic that Twilight was trying to go for. Middle school girls and high school girls and boys definitely still like reading about college kids. In fact, that might even a bit cooler for them. It gets rid of the worst of the creepiness of Edward being into her, and it would be reduced more to just like a joke rather than like an actual problem in the text. And it would also justify Edward's existence in this space a billion times over, because instead of being some just old unhinged weirdo hanging out in a high school, he could be a knowledge-obsessed vampire who wants to learn it all, and he bounces around from community college to community college under different identities, just exploring different topics, taking advantage of an immortality to grow his wealth of knowledge. That's an interesting guy. I'd like to read about him. No, we're sticking with him being in grade school. Fuck me, I guess. That's fine. The exact same energy as Angel in Buffy, talking about how he was super into 14-year-old Buffy, despite him being centuries old. And making it even worse, this over a century-year-old man puts the responsibility of the decision on her shoulders, saying he can't stay away. You can, legally probably should, and the fact that you're stalking this person for essentially 24 hours out of the day because you do not sleep might possibly make you reconsider your own judgment in this situation. But this is borderline coming across like the Jeffrey Dahmer show at this point. Just a little bit less cannibalism overall. We just need to embrace that and continue on. Now, through some circumstances that should have taken half the pages they did, Bella ends up alone in a city and somehow being stalked by a actual serial killer. A word I cannot say, serial killer. This is confirmed when Edward reads his mind at a distance and knows he has previous victims, and yes, he's done the horrible thing and killed them. And we watch in graphic detail as Edward kind of commits himself to killing this guy one day. He doesn't, but okay. And saves Bella from this pack of monsters. Cool moment for Edward if it just wasn't so out of left field, and again, the focus narratively isn't really on the horror of the scene or the fear in Bella, and it's just entirely on the violent potential of Ed.
I'll kill you.
He is looking for hours after saving her from this any excuse to reasonably get away from Bella so that he can then hunt this man down and murder him. That's not what ends up happening, and instead, Edward just turns him into the police and we see the guy gets arrested. Cool, you want to take down serial killers. Hopefully nothing contradicting that pops up in the narrative later. But to Ed's shock and my own, Bella's kind of just reasonably okay after nearly being assaulted by a gang, and she goes on a date with Edward where she orders mushroom ravioli. Good taste. Again, a waitress thinks how hot Ed is, and he slut-shames her because Ed is a bad man. And after this scene, we stumble through the story until Bella begins to put together the tendrils of Ed being a bad old vampire. And if you would like to know how this scene plays out, Stick around after the quick word from today's sponsor. But first, I want to give a tremendous thank you to today's sponsor, Squarespace. As you know, Squarespace is the all-in-one platform that's going to be able to help you take your business to the next level or get it going by educating you and encouraging you to take the proper steps to stand out online. Whether you're just starting out or managing a growing brand, Squarespace makes it easy to create beautiful, gorgeous, those explosion, so pretty website to engage with your audience and sell them anything from products to time to, if you get creative, I'm sure a bunch of other weird things, legal weird things. And it's all in one place, in your terms. And they are just so full of key features you might not even like think to add to your website for months down the road, that just up front, they're gonna be like, hey, get a payment portal in there. Their asset library allows you to upload, organize, and access all of your content from one place, as well as manage all your files from one central hub and use them across the entire Squarespace platform. Squarespace's flexible website design will allow you to just drag and drop things into place using their Fluid engine to make sure your website, despite being within the same ecosystem, has its own distinct look and feel and is exactly how you want it to be. Whether it's blogs, email campaigns, appointment scheduling, gated member areas, and more, they've got everything you need to get started. So head on over to squarespace.com for a free trial when you're ready to make your first purchase of a domain or website. Go to squarespace.com/Daniel Green to save 10% off and get your business running today. Now, I do think I read the original Twilight book when I was pretty young, but I don't remember it at all. And this scene I remember playing out in the movie as Edward showing Bella he sparkles in the sunlight. That is not in this book when she finds out that Ed is a vampire. And instead, they're driving in a car together and she just figures it out. She just kind of is like, hey man, you're a vampire. And and she's cool with it. So she, gang attack avoidance, she's all right. Finding out she's in a car with something that feasts on humans, she's also pretty good, solid. She's just not really a shakeable individual. You might eat people? You think that scares me? I don't care. Give me that cold dick. Bella's just like a homie with vampires. She's, as a potential prey for them, just not really understanding the danger. She just trusts this guy who she just immediately falls in love with so much that she doesn't even suspect for a moment that he could be like putting her under a spell. Maybe she's like been drugged. And instead, yeah, okay. This seems cool. And this is where we get to the Achilles heel of Midnight Sun, and possibly the experimental portion of it, and that is its treatment to conflict. Yes, there is a consistent conflict throughout Midnight Sun, where Eddie wants to kill Bella. It evolves and is addressed throughout the story, but that's kind of like a tertiary conflict being treated as a primary one. Typically there's antagonists, outside forces, though if this was handled really intelligently and deftly, it certainly could be a primary conflict. It's not. In fact, the narrative seems to flinch away from any potential wider conflict. It is brought up that there is a tribe here that has a very shaky treaty with the vampires, and they might be werewolves. So could there be a theory, a bit of mystery of how does this person not get their mind read? Why am I so into her all of a sudden? Kind of reversing that potential conflict to be from Ed's perspective, where he becomes paranoid that possibly she's a plant. Nope. None of that. They're just perfectly in love. Well, okay. What if we had someone within the Cullen family turn out to be secretly kind of a bad guy? Like the father, right? He's the doctor. They're constantly moving around. Why did he put these vampires in high school? Is this some kind of weird conspiracy? He's gathering these vampires with powers around him. Is he going to do something with? Nope. He's just a really good guy. And so as we approach the third act, where the conflict comes from is as startling as that one Robert Pattinson movie where it just ends with like it being revealed, oh, 9/11. That's a thing, by the way. But we'll get there. We'll get there. Just keep in mind that there isn't really consistent conflict. There's just brief moments of tension, like a serial killer being after Bella for a moment. And that's it. Even that serial killer thing could have been drawn out. Maybe some weird psycho fixates on Bella in the town, and Edward's got to find a way to kill this monster without bringing attention to himself. It's hard to get away with murder, and that way it brings in Bella's dad being a cop. Nope. My mind did just spend a lot of time listening to this book, inventing conflict, theorizing about it, and having to let it go when it was proven wrong, because I was searching for it. Anyway, the big takeaway from Bella figuring out that Edward is a vampire is just the joy of her being like, I still want to be with you, and Edward being like, I love you. I'm probably still gonna fucking murder you one day, but I love you, bitch. Repeat that. I'm trying to actually not exaggerate. Probably 250 times throughout the rest of the book from where we are. If you had like a swear jar of just all the times that Edward thinks that exact pattern, and I had to guess the number in there, it would actually genuinely be about 250 times. And the most cringe characterization moment for Ed appears here, where he assigns himself to be Bella's guardian vampire. He thinks, well, if I cannot stay away from you, you're clearly drawn to danger, then I'm going to be your guardian vampire. And then he goes ahead and turns the serial killer in, kind of doing a little mini Dexter character arc for Edward, because it's also revealed he used to eat people and kill them, but they were bad people. So he was kind of Dexter. He's Dextering it up. From here, he continues his behavior of watching Bella in her sleep and hears her moan that she loves him and he loves her too. They establish that between them after he describes her perfect, curvy 17-year-old body. Yeah, I know. You can't give me that look. It's in the book. The first character in all of fiction to watch JFK die and also thirst after a girl born in the 90s.
I love how you keep going.
I can't get it out. Then the conflict kind of shifts to being about Bella and Edward having a bit of a competition around who loves who more. This is a serious conflict between them. They're not fighting. It's just presented narratively as if this is a conflict.
I just love you so much. Come here to me.
And it's re-emphasized during this time just how much everyone wants Edward and is so jealous of Bella. Now, there's a pivot for Ed's character here, and I think this is meant to make us like him more, because he now starts using his mind violation of minors in this high school to interfere in their love lives, figure out who likes who, and begin setting them up so they can kind of start asking each other. This is not good. This is not a good thing for you to be doing, Edward. You are interfering in the emotional development of teenagers. You are, again, hearing their thoughts, their private desires that they might not ready to have out for other people to experience, and deciding that, oh, this person's crushing on this person this week for now. I'm going to make that turn into a relationship. And what makes it worse is a lot of the people he's setting up are people who have been jealous or interested in Bella. So on another read, it kind of comes across like he's just trying to get rid of the competition. And I gotta talk about something a little bit heavy here, so I'm sorry, trigger warnings for unaliving oneself, but we're gonna talk about that now, because as Edward is contemplating how dangerous his world is for Bella to be around, one of the serious considerations he goes through is that, saying he can't leave when, excuse me, sir, you can. And I know also talked to death about this story is the unhealthy relationship dynamic of Bella and Edward, but I feel the need to give my 2 cents here as well. One, if you are someone who is young of age who happens to be watching this video, please go study. The future's not looking bright. But also, it is not normal to feel a level of love for somebody that you feel no other option than to unalive yourself if you cannot be with them. That is not healthy and says nothing but how unemotionally mature that person is as an individual. It is also not normal, pulling from other quotes from Ed here, to think of yourself as entirely being about or devoted to another person. Healthy relationships are about boundaries, balance, and open understanding. And shockingly, Ed manages to avoid all of those by also consistently gaslighting and lying to Bella. I would like to give a bit of a reprieve here, an insight into the exact prose and internal dialogue of Edward. So, for your enjoyment, here is a dramatic reading. I really hope I don't kill this bitch, but I might. I love her, but it's her choice. I'm 90 and she's a minor. I just had that in my head and I needed to get it out. Thank you. What's interesting is at this point, Bella actually finds out that Edward watches her in her sleep. And I thought this could actually potentially be a source of conflict. I didn't know the story too well, and maybe boundaries were going to be established. It'd be like, hey man, don't watch me in my sleep. It's a bit weird, or at least join me in cuddles. Well, the latter does end up happening. Bella is 100% okay with this man having been watching her in her sleep since before their romance started by a rather large chunk of time. And I actually can't say that too confidently because this book kind of treats time in a similar way that It Follows does, except the same way that It Follows tries to keep like it ambiguous what era it's in. Midnight Sun leaves it ambiguous just how much time is passing. It's a crutch, and it's one the story would fall apart without. I have no further comments on that. The sparkle scene does end up happening though. Edward takes her to the forest and shows her his true form.
This is the skin of the killer, Bella.
In the sunshine. But I actually have less of a problem with this scene than I thought I would while having a critique. And part of that is I actually do think the movie possibly handled it a bit better combining the scenes, having Bella make the accusation of what he is more closely in the narrative to seeing the sparkle reveal. At least in that case, it kind of does have some impact of like all of this happening at once. But with these events so separated out, it more just feels like Bella's going to now see the sparkle fiery form because it's more described as like flame here, which is better. That part of this is better in the books, like the description versus the visual in the movie, but I like how the movie kind of moved these things into being closer together if my memory of it from a long time ago is correct.
People would know we're different.
Now, as time continues on, their relationship and romance blooms, and Alice, Edward's sister, who I think most people here are aware of, at least I'd hope so, Edward has siblings, one of them is Alice, who can see into the future, predicts that Bella is going to come over and meet the family, and she does. That's kind of how the book uses powers throughout it. It's fucking shocking what this does because there's superpowers here. But instead of doing anything interesting, we get like predicting borderline just family events and baseball later, which I always somehow forget is in here. Now you're thinking, okay, her meeting the family, that's going to be what brings conflict. No, aside from an even weirder one, because we do get a line where Edward promises Bella that she is hotter than his sister.
Why can't you just be normal?
And I actually started to agree with a part of Edward's internal dialogue for once here in Midnight Sun, because he starts really noting how Bella doesn't seem to have any problem putting herself in repeated danger, including coming to a den of vampires. And he's 100% right. Bella's a knuckle-dragging idiot. Her biggest concern going in to meet a fleet of human eaters that she has no verifiable evidence that they don't eat humans aside from just the word of a vampire is that they won't like her. It's kind of played as an admirable quality, and in some ways socially, sure it is. Bella sure is open-minded, but in a real world situation, she's an idiot. So she goes to their house. One of Edward's sisters does not like Bella. That's kind of a source of conflict, but it's just kind of argued out later on. And Ed plays Bella a song on a piano, and I do not know what song it is, but I know he struck a minor. Oh my God. We're just going to go ahead and jump to the baseball scene because essentially nothing has happened of note in this book up until this point. And yeah, the vampires have a frolicking little game of baseball. And I don't know if it was just the genuinely numbing approach to storytelling that the book had taken up to this point, or if it actually was a kind of fun, engaging scene, but I enjoyed this probably the most of anything we got in the entire story. It's so absurd that it almost starts feeling intentional and brilliant in its ludicrousness. And I actually kind of like Stephenie Meyer's mind as a writer. Like, there is something immensely charming about her raw devotion to low-stakes fantasy storytelling here that I began internally kind of making the case for Twilight being like an immensely influential, cozy fantasy story. If the marketing around it was a little bit different, this could be slotted in there, except for the wildly graphic, gory, and over-the-top ending. We'll get there. But at this baseball game, chapter 21 of a total of 30, the actual conflict is introduced. Stranger vampires come onto the field hearing these other vampires play, which apparently is a very distinct noise, and we meet James and his band of actual bad vampires. Everything changes when the baseball game is attacked. Because of Ed's ability to read minds and Alice's ability to see the future, they know James within this group is going to be a big old threat to Bella, and he's going to hunt her after he witnesses her with the group. And it's kind of actually more about Edward than Bella. James is like wanting this competition, so like vampire on vampire crime and violence and murder seems to be a thing you can get away with.
Anyway, you might remember that.
But the end logic and result here is that Bella needs to go into some form of hiding, so she goes on home with Ed and she starts packing her things to get the hell out of Dodge. And this is the most character destroying scene for Bella in terms of being likable, because Charlie has been kind of just a nothing burger this book so far. I have a feeling in Twilight he's probably got way more character, but in terms of Midnight Sun, he's just less prevalent for obvious reasons. We're getting more of Ed's family, not Bella's. He's there, but just not a ton. And to his credit as a father, he's not like bodily getting in the way of Bella as she's packing her things and saying she's going back to be with her mom. And she says it's about breaking up with Edward for some reason and how she's doing it. And it's kind of strange. You're like, God damn. I mean, okay, if this is the excuse you're going to go with, and your dad's not physically barring you from leaving, so let's just let this play out. Bella then decides to tear out his heart and hand it to him for no reason.
Why did you do that? Why?
I want to emphasize again, Charlie not getting in her way, saying to his daughter that he is so grateful he's able to now spend time with, like, please don't leave. And Bella deliberately uses the same words her mother used when she left Charlie as she's walking out the door.
Bella, come on, I just got you back.
Yeah, and you know, if I don't get out now, then I'm just gonna be stuck here like Mom.
Again, she is already leaving. She is no longer at she is not being physically stopped by him and is saying, like, I'll sleep in the car if I need to on the way back to Arizona. I'm out of here right now. But just decides in the moment to be like, oh, let's emotionally traumatize my father. Of all of the lies you could have come up with to go down to Arizona, to a life you once had, this was probably the worst you could have chosen, because the way you're framing breaking up with Edward is going to make your police father probably have a lot more skepticism of this guy and keep a closer eye on your secret vampire boyfriend. And it seems to also be closing the door to any possibility of you coming back in this moment. Instead, may I propose you say, oh, a friend of mine down in Arizona got hurt. They're in the hospital. I need to go visit them. It's not looking good. Dad, I gotta go. He's in the middle of a case, which you know about. Investigating murders is a B-plot happening in the background. So you know he can't leave. You'd be able to get out of there. And hell, maybe even your boyfriend Edward could be like, hey, I'm going with her because this is serious. We've already been spending a lot of time with each other recently, and this seems like it'd be okay. Instead, no.
Emotional, damn it!
Let's just set up a last-minute conflict that doesn't need to exist and hurt the most likable character in the story. What the fuck? And at this point, I began to realize something that I never even considered with this story before, but I'm going to say is another plot hole. Because they are being hunted by James, who's a tracker, right? Like, he is someone you don't want hunting you. My problem with that is you have someone who can see the future, someone who can read minds, and Edward's brother is a super strong for a vampire. Why aren't you hunting the hunter? Like, it's so glaringly obvious that he's not with a ton of people. They're able to locate him due to Edward's powers and Alice's frequently. It's just not really addressed aside from just like, oh, he's the hunter and he does have friends. Vampire on vampire violence is going to happen. What is stopping you from, instead of splitting up, making it so Bella's not as protected as possible, turning the table and going in the offensive? Even if the other vampires get mad at it, you now have, like, I don't know, self-defense? I'm sure there's self-defense in the vampire world. I'm not going to get into all of the beats that happen here that go on way too long, but after a bunch of bullshit, Bella is lured away by James using a fake recording of her mother sounding like she's in duress to get her out of the protection of the Cullens. He then is able to kidnap her just as Edward arrives back from like their grand plan to misdirect James on where Bella is. He then, as they're leaving the airport, is able to find a car with Nas in it.
I need Nas.
I like that Stephenie Meyer's a fan of Fast and the Furious. That's all I have to say about that. And typically in these scenes where an author is trying to have like a lot of momentum and we're going after like time ticking down, there's an incredible pace to the writing because this is the climax. We're going to get to that violent moment. There's details, but it's very calculated what details you're getting. Midnight Sun decides to describe graphically how much they are held up leaving the parking garage because of the arm, like the exit. That takes up a sizable chunk because they are frustrated. Oh my God. Why am I still talking about this? What am I doing with my life? Why do I kind of want to reread it? I shouldn't want to reread it. This is wrong. And just to add some extra spice to these sequences, again, Ed is thinking about unaliving himself during this stretch in case if something goes wrong. My guy. Anyway, they get to where James has taken Bella and stop him from actually killing her. And it's pretty brutal.
She will stop bleeding.
Way more than the movie was. Bella is bleeding out, and she's only saved due to supernatural suturing from Ed's father. And we also see that she has been bitten by James, who's just like easily killed by the rest of the family. Again, begging the question, why didn't you all just go on the offensive? Whatever. Ed then sucks the venom out from the vampire bite. And I've seen a lot of people give this narrative beat crap in Twilight because they're like, oh, you can't suck out snake venom. I'm actually going to be a full-on defender of Twilight here. One, it's vampire venom. Who knows what magics a vampire's mouth holds? Perhaps they can absorb the venom of another vampire. This is not, in the grand narrative focus, something that's deserving of my ire. I think this is something where it's kind of like, yeah, you can have a problem with that, but don't you want to have a problem with any of this instead? Ed bites her, begins drinking her blood. There's a moment of, oh my God, is he going to keep drinking? No. Nope. And she goes to the hospital and she's all right. Actually, that's oversimplifying. She's not all right. She is really fucked up. And again, the movie just kind of decided to downplay it for the PG-13 rating. But I think in the book, it actually makes this sequence work a bit more, just having her take that much damage. And it justifies Ed's kind of resurging hesitance to be around her because of just how brutal it is. So credit to Stephenie Meyer for actually making this bit work more than it did in her adaptation. And just rubbing salt in the wound for Charlie, he, of course, is very concerned of how his daughter got so injured. They say she stumbled and fell through glass in a hotel. To be honest, most believable part of this entire story with the characterization of Bella we've gotten so far, to the point where both of her parents just absolutely buy the fact that she fell through a window despite an emotionally turbulent time with her boyfriend going on. And again, is Stephenie Meyer secretly like this dark humor genius? I'm not sure. But the excuse they give Charlie is just that, oh yeah, I actually do want to stay and live with you in this small town. I was just upset because Edward told me how much I mean to him. And that's a trauma response due to your all's divorce. It's all your fault, parents. That's why I got injured and said those horrible, mean things. To be fair, Bella's a kid. She's not meant to have the most emotionally mature responses to stuff. That doesn't feel good to say in this story, though, does it? I'm sure this has been proposed before, but I would really like a dark thriller sequel to this spinoff where it turns out Midnight Sun, not a retelling, alternate timeline. And book 2 is this really intense, horrific thriller between Charlie and Ed, where he figures out what he is and this creep who's been around his minor daughter and decides that, like, no, you've put her under a spell, obviously, and I'm gonna hunt you down and kill you. But it becomes this incredibly emotionally conflicted thing with his daughter that he loves so much, but he loves her so much he can't let her go down this path. That is a story I would read, but I'm still probably gonna reread this one day because I weirdly loved it. Why? Small note here for writing. There's also surprisingly large chunks of this book that are in the future tense because we get Ed reading Alice's mind and then seeing the future in her visions, which he then narrates to us. And it's just off-putting. It's not super well executed, and you just don't expect that in a Twilight book to suddenly have these not brief, but sizable text chunks where we're just hearing predictions that may or may not even occur. If I was going to be an asshole, I would also get into how inconsistent Alice's powers are, where sometimes she's unable to see beyond a couple minutes. Other times she's able to just know a car is never going to be searched by the police ever, no matter what decisions are made. So, I mean, it's time-seeing powers. You can have some wiggle room there. It's just another, like... Now, though, Edward is brought a camera that apparently James recorded a video for him on, so he gets to watch as James tortures Bella again, a psychological angle that I think kind of works here, and I don't know, like it makes some of the conflict re-arising within Edward work. At this time, though, Bella's mom arrives, and her mother's characterization, I've heard a lot of people talk about Charlie, not a ton of people talk about her mother, Renee, who is the perfect blend of emotionally bombastic yet distant to make me completely understand Bella's psychological circumstance. I actually think Renee makes an impact on the page and is not abusive, but certainly not someone who seems to be a great parent. We are seeing this through Ed's perspective, don't get me wrong, and I do not trust that, but her actual actions within the page and the way he described her kind of line up. She's not my favorite character by any means, but in terms of a concept that I feel is like vividly brought to the page, Renee is repugnant in the right way. More gaslighting of the Swan family happens though, and before too long, Bella is able to leave the hospital recovering from her catastrophic injuries. And here we kind of begin to wrap up the overall conflict of Ed being unwilling so far to turn Bella. He invites her out in formal attire. She thinks it's going to be a night of turning, but it's actually prom. And this mirage of a conflict is addressed, and it really becomes clear how flimsy Ed's arguments are, because we've explicitly seen in this story that as a vampire, you can survive forever off animal blood, and there's no risk of the sun killing you. It just makes you sparkle. And so you get to live a rich, privileged life in cloudy areas forever around people you love dearly. Twilight successfully defanged the consequences of becoming a vampire and then made it the central source of conflict for its first book, kind of just making Edward seem like he's this self-hating douche, which to the book's credit, he is, but everyone around him that is a vampire kind of acts like this is this tremendous decision as well, when in reality, I don't think it's that big a deal. And if I remember correctly, the amount of strain Bella goes through when she actually is finally turned is not pleasant, but I wouldn't say it's like more brutal than recovering from major surgery, which, by the way, Edward, if you leave her as a human, she might have to do repeatedly being around you. And with your pledge to never leave her and constant consideration of if you do, it might actually be the better choice to just turn her. And I cannot believe I'm saying that, but within your own logic, that's the better move, dude. But her soul, and Ed goes to a church, religious themes. Okay, but we're shown the best people in the whole story are, without a doubt, the Cullen family, and humans as a whole are painted wildly negative aside from Bella and her dad. From beginning to end, humanity, yes, is kind of looked up to by Edward, but thematically, it's by no means elevated in being a vampire. vampire. If you want to have this spiritual through line, you can't then turn around and make Edward seemingly overly human. His flaws are not coming from being a vampire. They're coming from his own personal decisions and lack of maturity. So why do I want to keep reading? I mean, there's even a promise throughout the book that Alice and Bella are going to become best friends because Alice sees it happening in the future. And it keeps being delayed and delayed in the text. So I thought, okay, eventually this is going to be something that we do pay a specific amount of page time to as Alice and Bella bond. Well, she's in the hospital or something. Nope. We are literally told, not shown, that their relationship as friends begins. And that's it. It gets a paragraph. Edward's like, and then they became friends. I still want to keep reading. Why? Why? But anyway, yeah, he takes her to prom, kisses her neck. That's the end of the story. I don't know if we got a sequel from Edward's perspective. I don't think so. But if we do, please, for the love of God, either continue to refuse to back down, not change a goddamn thing, and keep telling this ridiculous, over-the-top story in the irrefutable way you do, Stephenie Meyer, and I respect that, or make it a psychological thriller in a new timeline where Charlie figures it out and that mustache to go beautiful man ain't happy. What do I give Midnight Sun? Out of 10. But this has just been your latest book review here on the channel. Like and subscribe if you have not already, and hit the Patreon if you want to support what I do here. We got 2 charity projects going on, Bam and Bam. Check those out if you want to. And one of them, of course, is for my ongoing Kickstarter for the TLT Definitive Edition, where 2 books have been combined into one, and all the proceeds of my end go to charity. Have a good one, y'all. Peace.